Welcome back, everyone. And man, what a card we had for 259. The prelims were dope, but the main card didn't really live up to the hype. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it just didn't really live up to the expectations we all had, in my opinion. But if I'm being honest, I kind of saw that coming because on paper that card was just, or the main card was just too good. It would have been pretty damn hard for it to live up to the hype. From a betting perspective, we did profit 3.52 units on the night. I'm going to keep this recap pretty short and quick here because we do have a number of fights to break down. So to start off, I missed on pretty much all of the props and the parlays. All the props, I kind of just picked the underdog and picked their most likely path to victory. Just ended up putting about a quarter of a unit on each of those props, and none of them ended up hitting. Not too surprised since a lot of the favorites ended up pulling through in those fights, except for the Espinosa fight, or Elliott versus Espinosa fight, where Elliott did have a large amount of control time and didn't really go for any sub attempts. Played it a bit safe, so not a terrible pick. I think he had a few opportunities to go for the submission, but decided to just accumulate some control time instead. The parlay ended up falling apart. I mean, neither of the legs hit. Batista got knocked out. Not super surprised by that. I did say that Jones has some good counters. I just thought that Batista would likely avoid a lot of those counters, and maybe his durability would hold up. But very nice, clean counter by Jones there. And then obviously Adesanya didn't win. Honestly, Blachowicz looked really, really good there, even on the feet. Made Izzy look human outside of that Romero fight. And then for the straight picks, took an L on the Matheus and Song Yadong picks. Matheus, I wasn't like super confident in him. I thought the fight would play out a little bit closer, but Matheus just got pretty much outclassed. Didn't really go to the grappling like I thought he might have or would. But not a good showing for him there. And then Song Yadong, I thought his striking would be a bit more crisper. I thought he would be landing the cleaner shots. But it seemed like he was struggling a bit with the length and the athleticism of Phillips. And then obviously Phillips had a really clean technique as well. So I think Song Yadong definitely needs to shore up some other parts of his game. He's pretty damn one-dimensional, and it's going to be hard to pick him against higher-level guys who can, start to go to their grappling a bit more, or who can kind of match his technicality on the feet. And then the other straight picks that I cashed on were Uros Medic, Askar Askarov, Dominic Cruz, and Aljamain Sterling. Jeez, what a fight that was. So, got bailed out hard with that DQ. I mean, Sterling just pretty much gassed himself out after that first two rounds. Got bailed out hard with that disqualification. And, not super proud of that pick, but at the end of the day, it is a win, and a win is a win, so I'll take that. Dominic Cruz pretty much played out how I expected it to. Kenny had a hard time finding the target, and Dominic Cruz, his athleticism definitely declined there, and he was huffing and puffing near that third round, but he was able to edge it out, and the fight was a little bit closer than I expected, but at the end of the day, he got it done. Casey Kenny's a young guy. Cruz, while he is very technical and skilled, is on a athletic decline, and a lot of his movement and footwork are a bit reliant on his athleticism, but looks like he was able to edge it out there. Askar Askarov was able to pretty much just thoroughly dominate Benavidez there. I don't think Benavidez is necessarily shot, but I don't know if he's going to be able to hang with the top 5, maybe top 10 guys anymore. Medic, pretty good performance by him. Played out pretty much exactly the way I thought it would. Pretty dominant. And then, that'll do it for the recap. So without further ado, let's get right into this card because we have 15, or actually I think 14 now. As I'm doing this, it looks like a fight might have dropped off. I think the hack press fight. And man, this card has pretty much fallen apart at the seams here. There's been a number of dropouts and replacements. This card looks nothing like when it was first announced, but I guess that's the price you pay for having 259, where there weren't any dropouts or cancellations or anything. So at least I'm glad that happened. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive right into this card. Matthew Semelsberger versus Jason Witt, and I think this is going to be the first fight of the night, at least according to the UFC webpage. I'm not sure if they're going to switch it up on me, but as of right now, I'm going to assume that it is. And what a weird fight to start off the card. I have a feeling that this is potentially going to be a squash match. The odds are aligned pretty closely, though. I mean, Semelsberger is the minus 150 favorite, and Jason Witt is the plus 130 underdog. And I can kind of see why. I mean, Semelsberger is still pretty green. And, Jason Witt, he's a bit older, has quite a bit of experience, but really doesn't have any sort of UFC experience. This guy's just been beating up guys on the regional scene. And I'm going to say it right now, but I think that Witt is a total fraud. I don't think he belongs in the UFC at all. He's got very sloppy striking. He's a bit slow, very loopy, and winds up on his shots quite a bit. And from what I've seen, he's not very durable either. He has a number of losses by knockout. It does look like he has a bit of power, but his technique isn't really good. Offensively, he's a bit basic, and outside of the power, I don't see him offering too much on the feet. Again, he's super slow and telegraphs his shots a lot. So against younger fighters who can really just see the shots coming from a mile away, I think he's going to have a pretty hard time landing on him. Defensively, he leaves his chin out quite a bit, and he is an older fighter. His reactions aren't as quick, and we do see him getting caught by guys like Takashi Sato, who are much quicker than him, much more explosive, being able to land clean on him. However, his bread and butter really is his grappling, I feel. I mean, he's got pretty heavy top control. Does have a good single leg and body lock trip that he goes to, but outside of that, his takedown entries aren't particularly good. So unless he's able to close the distance on his opponents, I see him having a really hard time landing the takedown. And if you kind of just take a look at his record, you'll see that all 5 of his most recent wins are against fighters that are older than him, and he's pretty fucking old himself too. I mean, he's 34, right? Yeah, he's 34. So a lot of the guys he's beating in his most recent fights are in their mid late 30s, even in their 40s. So overall, I just not really impressed with Witt's resume or his game. I mean, the guy's making his UFC debut at 34 and has really just made a name for himself in the regional scene where he wasn't really even dominating or anything. So again, not very impressed with what Witt brings to the table here. His opponent, on the other hand, is pretty green. Has 9 fights himself, but I'd say he's looked pretty good so far. On the feet, I'd say he has pretty quick hands. He's got a good jab, straight right, overhand right, and some solid leg kicks. Not super high output, but it does look like he packs quite a bit in his punches. It does look like he overextends a bit on some of his shots, which could be a bit dangerous here against a grappler like Witt. We saw in his fight against Kamchebekov that he did overextend on a few shots, threw some spinning elbows, got taken down, and was controlled there for a little bit. I mean, he did work his way back up and did win a very tight decision there. But, the fight IQ there definitely a little bit lacking. Like, Kamchebekov was really only having some success on the ground. And to overextend yourself like that is very poor decision making, in my opinion, especially since he was doing pretty good on the feet. Outside of that, though, I do like what I see from Semelsberger on the feet. He's aggressive, he's got quick hands, and he's pretty explosive. But taking a look at this matchup, I really do favor Semelsberger here. I think he's got the speed and the quickness, and then also the technique on the feet. I definitely see a potential knockout here as well. I definitely do think that Witt might be a bit chinny. Again, he has a number of knockouts on his record, and with how sloppy he is defensively, I definitely do think that Semelsberger will be able to catch him. Honestly, I favor Semelsberger pretty heavily here on the feet. The only concern I have is he is a little green, and I don't know how he's going to react. If he hurts Witt and isn't able to get him out of there, I don't know if maybe he'll have like an adrenaline dump and unload on Witt without, actually getting him out of there. Burning through his gas tank. So that is a concern. The other concern is, again, his fight IQ, where, he was consistently overextending himself and leaving himself wide open for takedowns. You don't want to do that against Witt, where, if he takes you down, he can control you for the rest of the round on there. Witt is a pretty big guy. However, if Semelsberger just fights a smart game plan and is able to just pick at Witt on the feet, I don't think Witt is going to be able to give Semelsberger much trouble. Like I said before, the grappling of Witt is really his strength. However, his wrestling isn't particularly good. I think he'll have a hard time taking Semelsberger down because he's pretty reliant on getting that single leg or that body lock takedown. I think he's going to have a hard time closing the distance and getting his hands on Semelsberger without eating a ton of clean shots. So really, I think his only way to get Semelsberger down is if Semelsberger just throws some spinning elbow or something and just leaves himself open to getting taken down. So I really like Semelsberger here. I think the minus 150 isn't a terrible price to pay, as long as he fights a smart game plan. And I actually don't think the Semelsberger by KO prop is too bad. The props for that haven't come out just yet, but when they do, I'll take a look at it. And if it's something juicy, I might put a little bit on it. But I think I'm going to play Semelsberger straight here. And yeah, to wrap it up, I do think Semelsberger is going to get the win here. And I'm looking to place a 1.5 unit bet on him. Jinh Frey versus Gloria de Paula, and Gloria de Paula is going to be the minus 165 favorite, and Frey is going to be the plus 145 underdog. And what a great fight this is. They should have put this fight on the 259 card, or at least put this on the co-main event slot. I'm kidding, this fight is pretty bad. Frey is probably one of the most low-level, boring fighters on the roster right now. I mean, she's in phenomenal shape, but overall, she's just not a really good fighter. Like, she's pretty flat-footed, generally pretty low volume as well, really only throws 1 or 2 strikes at a time, is a bit slow and extremely hittable too. She's got decent takedown defense, but once the fight gets to the ground though, she does seem a bit lost there. Overall, she's just not very good anywhere. And in the fights that she does win, she doesn't even win them very convincingly. They're oftentimes very just sloppy, grindy fights that honestly could have swung the other way. A lot of the fights that she does win in are pretty back and forth. In a lot of these fights, her opponents are touching her up or are able to reverse position on her, but somehow she's able to eke out these wins. So even in these wins that, not very convincing, not very emphatic wins, and in these losses, she just doesn't look very good in them at all. Just very low volume, very hittable. And for as strong as she looks for that division, it doesn't look like she uses her size very well either. So yeah, just overall not very high on Frey at all. And honestly, I think she's going to get cut if she loses this fight. And taking a look at her opponent, de Paula, though, she fights out of that tie stance. She's got a good jab, straight right. Decent combination striking, and seems to sit down quite a bit on her shots. She's also got a pretty good clinch knee and does seem to have pretty quick hands as well. Overall, I'd say she'd have a pretty significant advantage on the feet here. I haven't seen too much out of her grappling, but it does look like she has some good takedown defense. I mean, she was able to stuff a lot of takedowns from Matheus in her Dana White's Contender Series fight. Was able to sprawl pretty well also. However, I'm not too sure that Frey is going to shoot on de Paula here. I mean, in her fight against Look Boon Mi, the only success that she really had was in the takedowns, but she didn't really go to it that much and instead just got touched up by her for most of that fight. However, I suspect that if Frey does decide to shoot the takedown, I think that de Paula will be able to stuff them and keep the fight standing. On the feet, I just see de Paula being able to just touch up Frey here. However, my only concern with this fight is that de Paula is a bit green. She's still very young. Only has 7 fights on her record, and if Frey is able to execute a smart game plan and just clinch up with de Paula, maybe hold her up against the fence, look to get some control time. It is a winnable fight for her, but I don't know if I can really trust the fight IQ of Frey to do that. On the feet, though, I just see de Paula landing the much harder, cleaner strikes. So I think I'm going to have to side with de Paula here when it comes to a pick. I don't know if I'm really going to bet this because de Paula is still pretty unproven and she's making her UFC debut. And as much as I want to fade Frey, I don't think de Paula has really shown me enough to make me want to lay minus 165 on her. However, one angle that I might want to take a look at in this fight is potentially de Paula inside the distance. I don't have the props for that just yet. I'm still waiting for the lines to come out for that. But if it's a juicy enough line, I might put a quarter of a unit on there, mainly because I think that Frey low-key might be a bit of a quitter, and de Paula hits pretty hard. So I think if she is able to line a few clean ones on Frey here, she might be able to get her out of there. Honestly, she's been knocked out, she's been knocked out a couple times, or she might just knock her down, go for the ground and pound, or maybe even the submission. So de Paula inside the distance, going to see what the props are for that. Might put a quarter of a unit there. Jonathan Martinez versus Davey Grant. And Martinez is going to be the minus 300 favorite here, and the comeback on Grant is plus 250. And I'm not too sure how I feel about Martinez just yet. He's got a really good kicking game, but it looks like he relies pretty heavily on that kicking game. I mean, he's pretty effective at it, but at the same time, it reminds me a bit of Chris Gutierrez, where he can do a ton of damage with his kicks, but outside of that, he's not showing too much else. It's been pretty effective so far, but I'm not too sure how far he'll be able to get with that style. But yeah, he's got a really solid kicking game, though. He'll attack the leg, body, and head. He'll mix it up pretty well, and it looks like he puts quite a bit in those shots as well. He will throw some punches in there occasionally, but usually it's when his opponent's backed up into the cage, or if he feels like he has an opening, he feels like they might be hurt, then he'll unload with a few punch combinations, but most of the time he's working the leg, body, or even the head with his kicks. And, sometimes he will set up his punches with some kicks. His opponents will maybe start to anticipate some of those kicks, drop their arm a bit, and that's when he'll start going off with some of his punches. That said, though, the kicks will make up a majority of his strikes. Defensively, he's pretty good. He likes to keep up that high guard, really good at just shelling up when he's getting hit. And that said, though, he does leave his body open. I mean, that tends to happen, though, when you're keeping your hands up the whole time. And we did see in his fight with Eel that Eel was having a bit of success with the body shots. However, he also does drop his hands a bit when he's throwing those kicks, so it leaves him a bit open to counters when he's throwing those kicks. Ewell was having a bit of success with this as well, but didn't look like Ewell really had the gas tank, and I think Martinez actually had Ewell hurt, I think midway through that second round too. So Ewell wasn't really able to capitalize, but I think there are definitely openings, or at least openings in Martinez's game that opponents can exploit going forward. Martinez also has a pretty dangerous knee up the middle as well. He's coming off of a pretty solid win against Almeida, but if I'm being honest, it did look like Almeida was a bit rusty in that fight. I mean, he did take about 2 years off, and the first 2 rounds it definitely looked like he was a bit out of rhythm, but he was picking it up in the third and was having a bit of success. But outside of that, I don't think Martinez has really fought any solid competition, because before that he beat up a pretty old and out of shape Sainz. Martinez also came in overweight that fight as well, as if he didn't have enough of an advantage as it stands against Sainz. But yeah, Martinez, not a bad fighter, but I am going to look to fade him somewhere in the future. I just don't know if Grant is going to be the guy to do it. But taking a look at Davey Grant, he is a bit light on the feet, is able to switch stances pretty well, and throws a lot of spinning attacks, front kicks and such. His punches are a bit loopy and tends to throw the same combos over and over, but on the feet he does have some really powerful hooks that he likes to throw, although he does leave his chin a bit exposed though. He also does stand pretty heavy on that lead leg, which Martinez can definitely take advantage of. He's got some decent timing on his takedowns, but his top control isn't that great, and he's not a super busy fighter. We did see him get swept by, Barron and Day, who aren't really that strong of grapplers. I want to say the wrestling is his base, but we haven't really seen him go to that recently. He's kind of fallen in love with his hands, but, I can kind of see why. He's getting a bit older. I don't think he could really go for a grappling-heavy attack, because at 35 it's going to be pretty hard for him, or pretty hard for his cardio to hold up if he's going to be wrestling for 2 or 3 rounds. But as far as this matchup goes, it's going to be a pretty tough fight for Grant, because he's a pretty limited striker on the feet. Martinez is also pretty solid defensively. It's going to be hard for Grant to land those hooks and those spinning attacks. And like I said before, Grant does stand pretty heavy on that lead leg, so Martinez is going to be chopping at that all day. And I don't know how many of those shots Grant can really take. And this is going to sound a little mean, but Grant just looks like a pretty fragile dude. I don't know if you guys have seen him fight, but this guy's got the weirdest looking body. I don't know how many kicks he could take. Honestly, he's got a bit of that old man body where his chest is kind of sagging a bit, but yeah, I don't know if he's going to be able to withstand too many of the kicks that Martinez is going to throw at him. I think for Grant to have really any sort of success this fight, he'll have to go to the body of Martinez and maybe just bite down on some of those kicks and look to just counter hard against Martinez when he's throwing those kicks. He'll also have to mix in some of his wrestling, but I'm not sure if he'll have too much success there. He's going to be fighting a much younger Martinez, and like I said before, Grant's top control isn't that great, and he is getting older, so I don't know how much success he'll have taking and holding Martinez down. Honestly, I see Martinez just kicking the shit out of Grant for 3 rounds, but at minus 300, it's pretty steep for me. He'll really have to be hurting Grant with those kicks if he's going to look like a minus 300 favorite. But I think the path to victory for Grant is just so narrow that it's really hard for me to want to take a shot on Grant here, even at plus 250. So I'm going to have to pick Martinez here, but I'm going to be avoiding this fight from a betting perspective. Charles Jourdain versus Marcelo Rojo. Or Rojo? I don't fucking know. But Jourdain is the minus 255 favorite, and the comeback on Rojo is plus 215. And I'll just say this right off the bat here. I don't think you should be playing Jourdain at minus 250. I mean, he's pretty light on the feet. He's got some really heavy body and leg kicks and has pretty quick hands, but does tend to load up on his shots quite a bit, and he will attack in bursts. But, with all that being said, he's a really wild fighter on the feet, and his defense, or lack thereof, is a massive liability for him. He leaves his chin out there and is extremely hittable. Also, his takedown defense and get-ups aren't that good either. Don't get me wrong, though. I mean, he is a really fun fighter to watch because of his offensive output, but you really shouldn't be laying minus 255 on him. Jourdain is a great fighter to bet on when he's the underdog, but he's essentially a wild card, and that makes him a very risky play if he's a heavy favorite. His style is great when you're looking for a live dog that could get an upset, but for someone who's minus 255, you need someone who's a bit more reliable, and in my opinion, Jourdain isn't a very reliable fighter. Like I said earlier, his offensive output is great, but defensively, he does leave his chin out there. It's a massive liability, and his grappling isn't great either, so there are a ton of holes for opponents to potentially exploit. That being said, I don't know if Rojo is necessarily the guy that could take advantage of his weaknesses here, because from what I've seen from Rojo, he's a pretty low output fighter himself and has fought pretty low level opponents for most of his career. He's got a pretty good tie clinch and some pretty nasty knees that he throws, but again, on the feet, he is a bit low output. Likes to throw that lead hook, a few straight rights, but most of the time he's just looking for power shots on the feet. He does throw some pretty heavy leg kicks as well, but outside of that, I haven't seen too much from Rojo to really give me confidence to pick him against Jourdain. I haven't seen much from his grappling as well, so I don't know if that'll be much of a factor here. I do think that he will look to clinch up with Jourdain eventually, since I think that Jourdain will be the quicker, lighter fighter on his feet. As far as this matchup goes, though, I do see Jourdain being the guy with higher output, the guy that's being aggressive more. I'm not quite sure how Rojo will deal with that, but I see him potentially looking to tie Jourdain up to tire him out a bit and to limit the output of Jourdain. I've said this earlier and I'll say it again, but the way Jourdain leaves his chin out is very concerning. Rojo does pack a bit of power too, but he doesn't seem like a very explosive type of fighter. Furthermore, Jourdain, while he has been hurt and dropped, he hasn't really been knocked out clean yet. So the pick here is going to be Jourdain. I think that he'll have the better output. We'll be landing more cleaner shots, but I'm not super confident in this. I think that if Rojo is able to accumulate some control time in the clinch, maybe even look to catch Jourdain, he could come away with either a knockout or a decision. But not super confident in either fighters. I just don't think that Jourdain should be that heavy of a favorite. So the pick here is going to be Jourdain with pretty low confidence. And as far as a bet goes, I don't think I'll be putting anything on this fight. And if I do, it might just be Rojo by KO or something. Very, very small amount, because this fight I'm just not super confident in. Rani Yahya versus Ray Rodriguez. And Yahya is going to be the minus 305 favorite here, and the comeback on Rodriguez is plus 255. And I think this is a pretty straightforward one to break down. Yahya, he's got really high level grappling, great transitions, great subs, Takedowns are solid. I mean, they're not great, but he does have some decent entries. His top control is pretty good as well. But as far as his stand up goes, he is a bit wild on the feet. He likes to swing massive hooks and overhands, and we'll throw in like jumping knees and stuff. And we see guys with top level BJJ do this a lot because they're not concerned about the fight being taken to the ground. In fact, they prefer to have the fight taken to the ground. So they leave a lot of openings for them to get taken down, but I don't think they mind at all. However, that does leave him a little bit exposed when he overextends like that. Does leave him open to getting hit with some clean shots. His opponent, Rodriguez, honestly is not very good. He's got quick hands and good power, but is a bit hittable himself. His BJJ is also extremely suspect. I think that if Yahya is able to get him to the ground, there's a good chance that he should be able to submit Rodriguez. I don't really think that Rodriguez is UFC caliber, but at the same time, they haven't really been doing him any favors with the matchmaking. He wasn't able to have any answers against Tony Gravely, where Gravely was able to just take him down and control him for 3 rounds before eventually getting them out of there with the ground and pound. I don't think that Yahya's quite the wrestler that Gravely is, but seeing him on his back for extended periods of time like that is not a very good look and doesn't really inspire much confidence in him. That being said, though, I think this is dogger pass all day because as much of a vet Yahya is, and as terrible as I think Rodriguez is, I just don't think it's a good idea to be laying minus 300 on a 36-year-old Yahya. I mean, Yahya was really just huffing and puffing after that first round against Enrique Barzola. And that was nearly a year ago. Well, pretty much a year on the dot from that day. He'll be a year older. I don't think his conditioning is going to get any better. I don't think his cardio is going to be getting any better. And if he isn't going to get Rodriguez out of there in that first round and a half or so, it's going to be a tough fight for him, especially if he's going to be sucking wind like he was against Barzola. And I think the knee-jerk comparison for this fight is going to be the Vieira fight, where Vieira just kind of blows his load in that first round, hunting the sub. But I don't think that's going to be the best comparison since Vieira was still pretty green, but whereas Yahya, while he is a bit older and the cardio might be on a decline, he's a much more experienced fighter. However, I'm just a bit worried that if he isn't able to get that submission on Rodriguez early, how the fight is going to play out. Because, after that first round, I think it's going to get pretty dicey for Yahya here. Rodriguez does have quite a bit of power in his hands, so if Yahya is gassed after that first round, there's a good chance that Rodriguez might be able to knock Yahya out. But this is not a fight that I want too much exposure on. I think if you pick Yahya or have him in parlays, you might be sweating it for that first round and a half. However, Rodriguez just isn't very good, so it's a tough fight. So I'm going to have to go with Yahya for that first round submission, but not super confident. And as far as a bet goes, I'm not sure if I'll play anything straight. I might do a little bit on the props, maybe like 0.1 unit or so on Yahya first round submission, and then maybe a round 2 or round 3 knockout prop for Rodriguez. But yeah, as far as a pick goes, not a very low confident pick on Yahya first round submission, and maybe just look to play some props for the betting here. Cortney Casey versus JJ Aldrich, and Aldrich is the minus 130 favorite, and the comeback on Casey is plus 110. And this is a pretty intriguing fight. I think there's a good chance this will be a banger of a fight, actually. Both of these ladies are primarily strikers and are more than happy to exchange in the pocket. I think this potentially can be a fight where we'll see a lot of back and forth. I think if your book offers it, it might be worth the small shot to bet on, fight of the night for this card. I know it sounds kind of crazy saying it because this is a women's MMA fight, but taking a look at the rest of the card, nothing really jumps out at me for a possible fight of the night contender. Maybe Dan Ige, Gavin Tucker, or Nicolau versus Kape. But outside of that, I don't see either any of the other fights really just jumping out. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is this fight is largely just going to be standing, and a lot of back and forth. It could be potentially be a 3-round war between these two. But taking a look at Casey, like I said before, primarily a striker. She does seem to have pretty heavy hands, although she's not really knocking anyone out at the UFC level. She does seem to sit down on her punches pretty well and does seem to pack quite a punch. She's got a decent grab, some good combination striking, but is a bit flat-footed on the feet and is somewhat hittable. The biggest weakness I would say for her is her grappling. Her takedown defense isn't that great, and her get-ups aren't that good either. As we saw in her last fight against Jillian Robertson, she was doing pretty well on the feet, but was just unable to stuff the takedowns of Robertson and ended up being controlled for most of 3 rounds before getting submitted. Furthermore, we've seen her continuously lose fights because of her poor takedown defense, like in her fight against Waterson, Eryk, and even Gedalia, although Gedalia's wrestling is pretty good. That said, though, the wrestling and grappling of Casey is definitely a liability here. However, I don't think that'll be too big of an issue here since Aldrich is primarily a striker as well. And as far as what she does well, I mean, they're pretty similar in the sense that they have pretty good combination striking. Aldrich also has a pretty good jab in 1-2, but I think the difference is that Aldrich has much better footwork, has pretty quick hands, and is honestly the better technical fighter here. I mean, she's got some good feints and is much more defensively sound than Casey. So on the feet, I think it's going to play out pretty closely, but I do slightly edge it out towards Aldrich here. However, I think that if Casey is the one pressuring, I think it'll be a much closer fight, whereas I think that if Aldrich is the one pressuring, I think she'll be the one who pulls out ahead. I see Casey potentially biting on some of the feints and leaving openings for Aldrich to explode in with some of her combination striking. That said, though, this is a pretty close fight to call. I think that whoever's pressuring will likely win it on the judges' scorecards. And, if I'm Aldrich, I would look to exploit the takedown defense of Casey. Even though Aldrich isn't really a grappler, I'd kind of just go and test the takedown defense of Casey just to see, where it is right now. I mean, it's a pretty glaring hole in her game, and it's definitely worth a shot to see if you're able to control her there. Because if the fight is pretty close on the feet, the judges will give the round to whoever is able to secure a bit of control time. That being said, though, I think Casey actually will be the stronger fighter in this matchup. I think she's more of a natural athlete, so it might be a little hard for Aldrich to hold or control Casey against the fence or on the ground. However, as far as the pick goes, I think I'm going to go with Aldrich here. I think she'll just be the crisper striker and probably will be the one that's landing a bit more on Casey. I also think that Aldrich does have a bit more of an upside here, as she's still the younger fighter and will likely be making improvements. But something to consider, though, is Aldrich hasn't been fighting the best opponents. She's primarily just been fighting a lot of other up-and-comers in Barber, Mueller, Mazo, and Viana. Hasn't really been tested, whereas with Casey, she's been fighting, although losing to pretty established UFC fighters like Calvillo and Angela Hill and Waterson. So, although Aldrich has looked a bit better on tape, I think that the level of competition definitely has to be a factor here. She's looked a lot better against lower level fighters, so the skill gap might not be as apparent when they're actually in the octagon together. So I'm going to have to go with Aldrich still, but as far as a bet goes, I'm not going to touch this. It's still a pretty low level women's MMA fight. Eryk Anders versus Darren Stewart, and Stewart is going to be the minus 187 favorite here, and the comeback on Anders is plus 162. And I'll say this right off the bat, but I think Eryk Anders is a total bum. This guy is just not good, and I'm pretty surprised he's still in the UFC. He's a pretty easy fade for me, honestly, but taking a look at, what he does well, I guess, he's got a bit of power in his hands, but, he has only really knocked out the chinniest fighters on the roster. Outside of that, though, I mean, he loads up on his shots. He's a bit slow on the feet, very, plodding footwork. Mainly really only throws 1-2s, the hooks. Just very basic striking. What I can say about him, though, he is, extremely durable. I mean, he can take a pretty massive beating. But overall, he's just not looked impressive at all. His striking game isn't good. His defensive striking isn't good. He gets hit quite a bit, and then his grappling isn't great either. I mean, even his win against Meerschaert was a bit questionable. If Meerschaert wasn't just faking knockdowns the whole time, I think Meerschaert could have made it a bit more competitive on the feet and probably could have had the decision swing his way. But he was so eager to get the fight to the ground. He was just falling to the ground after every shot from Anders to try and lure Anders to the ground, but Anders wasn't biting on it, and I think that looked pretty bad in the judge's eyes. You can't just keep dropping to the ground and expect to win a decision. Outside of that, he's also gotten the shit beat out of him by Khalil Roundtree of all people, and Khalil Roundtree is coming off of a loss to Marcin Prachnio, who is garbage. And let me tell you something about Roundtree. So before his fight with Anders, he got beat up pretty bad by Johnny Walker in the clinch, and so he decided to go to Thailand to work on his Muay Thai a bit. And so he comes back into this fight after spending, just a few months in Thailand to work on his Muay Thai and absolutely schools Anders. I mean, this guy comes back from Muay Thai summer camp and beats the shit out of Anders with the few techniques that he's learned there. So Anders, not high on him at all. Looking to fade him hard in this matchup. The only thing is he's going up against Darren Stewart, who isn't a very reliable fighter himself. That said, though, Stewart is levels above Anders on the feet. Grappling wise, I don't think he's that good, but I definitely think that his takedown defense and probably his wrestling is still going to be better than Anders. Stewart's got great movement on the feet, good leg kicks, really quick hands, and hits really hard. Has decent combination striking, but can be a bit low output at times. However, I think that's just him trying to pace himself a bit, because if he goes off too early or he's throwing too much, he tends to tire himself out. So recently I've seen him start to slow it down a bit, where he'll start to fight in bursts instead of just going all out. He's also a little bit hittable, but has been super durable so far. I mean, he's been eating some clean shots from guys like Kevin Holland, Maki Pitolo, and even Bevan Lewis. So as far as I know, Stewart is pretty cast iron, and his durability kind of makes up for his slightly bad defense. However, like I said before, his biggest issue is his cardio, and it's really hard for me to want to lay the chalk on a fighter who can and has gassed out, because no matter how good you are or how bad your opponent is, if you get gassed, it's pretty much over, and all the skill and technique in the world isn't going to mean anything. And even though Anders has only really been knocking out chinny fighters, you don't want to be eating clean shots from him when you're tired. That said, though, I don't see too many paths to victory for Anders here. I think that his only real path to victory is if Stewart just blows his load early, uses up all of his energy, and tires himself or punches himself out after that first round or first round and a half. I'm really heavily considering laying the chalk on Stewart here at minus 187. I definitely don't think the line is going to be going any lower for him. I don't really think anyone's going to be putting money on Anders. I'm pretty certain that this fight is largely just going to play out on the feet, and in that case, I see Stewart being the one who's landing the much cleaner shots, doing a bit more damage, having more volume. Honestly, I just see Anders just being a punching bag here, and he might have a bit of success with a little bit of his shots, but overall, I think Stewart is going to pretty much run away with it. Again, the cardio is an issue with Stewart, but I don't think Anders is really that sort of a pressure fighter. I don't think he'll give Stewart enough trouble on the feet to the point where he's really pushing himself. I think more likely than not, this will be a pretty one-sided fight. So, I may have just talked myself into placing a bet on Stewart here, but yeah, the pick is going to be Stewart, and I haven't locked anything just yet, but I am very heavily considering Stewart here, even though he does have his cardio issues. Again, nothing locked in yet, but I might have to sleep on this, really think about it for a little bit. But if I do lock it in again, I will post this on my Bet MMA Tips page. However, I do feel that Stewart is a pretty safe play. I think he's going to be a solid parlay piece, and I do see the line on him moving to maybe minus like 250 or maybe even higher come fight night. Matheus Nicolau versus Manel Kape, and I actually think it's pronounced Cap, but I've been calling him Kape, so I'm just going to keep it consistent and continue to call him Kape. But this is a pick'em fight. Both guys are at minus 110 right now. And let's start with Nicolau. So Nicolau, he is pretty light on the feet. He has good head movement, has a good jab and counter right. What I like about him, though, is he does go to the body and the head. He'll mix it up pretty well, and will occasionally throw the leg kick in there as well. He actually doesn't attack the legs too much, but he will go there to kind of stay busy sometimes. Defensively, he's pretty solid. He's good at keeping his head off the center line when striking, and will keep his guard up as well. However, I think he's a much better grappler than he is a striker, although he has been pretty content with keeping a fight standing. He's got good timing on his takedowns and has a good foot sweep that I've seen him use. He has a number of submission wins, but isn't super active when it comes to hunting for submissions. I think he's pretty good when he's the one initiating the grappling, but I've seen him struggle a bit when his opponent is the one that's initiating the wrestling or when he has his back on the ground. Nicolau also seems to have pretty good cardio as well. He's able to fight at a pretty high pace for 3 rounds. His opponent Kape can put on a pretty crazy pace as well. Kape can go hard for 3 rounds, and he's primarily a striker though. He's got pretty fast hands, good counter striking. Does keep his hands low, but it is good at pumping that jab out. He's got some solid leg kicks as well, but overall I think that Kape is the better striker here. I think he's a bit more technical and has the more fluid boxing in this matchup. I actually did pick him against Pantoja when he was making his UFC debut. I don't know what happened in that fight, but he was super tentative and just seemed really hesitant to throw and really had no urgency in that fight. Honestly, I was kind of hyped about that matchup, but was disappointed with how it kind of played out. I think he will give a better account of himself in this next matchup, but who knows? I mean, it kind of seemed like he didn't really want to get hit in that fight, and Pantoja does hit hard, but it also might have been jitters because he was making his UFC debut. In any case, I think that if he lets his hands go in this fight, he should be able to touch up Nicolau. I think he'll have the speed advantage and likely the technical advantage, so I definitely see him being able to land on Nicolau. However, I don't know if he's going to be as gun-shy as he was against Pantoja. Something else that does concern me about Kape is his takedown defense and how bad he is when he's on his back. I've seen him in fights where he's been held down for extended periods of time, and even though Nicolau isn't a great wrestler, you don't want to be caught on your back for too long against him. So for that reason, I am going to favor Nicolau a bit more in this matchup, but it is a pretty close fight. I think that Kape will have a bit of an advantage on the feet, but he won't be completely blowing Nicolau out of the water here. Nicolau will keep it competitive, but over extended periods of time, I think that Kape will pull ahead, assuming he does put up a bit of volume like he usually does. But if he's as tentative as he was against Pantoja, then it's gonna be a tough fight for him. I also think that Nicolau will look to take the fight to the ground if Kape starts to pull away with the striking. So I'm going to lean more towards Nicolau, but I'm not 100% confident in the wrestling of Nicolau to be able to successfully take Kape and hold him on the ground. If Kape is able to stuff a few takedowns and keep it standing, he might be able to just outland Nicolau on the feet. However, I do also think that Kape has knockout potential as well, so I guess it all kind of evens out. Basically, this is a pick'em fight for a reason. And I think I changed my mind here. I'm going to lean more towards Kape. I think that, if he is able to keep the fight standing, I think he should be able to pull ahead. I think that after a dud of a performance from his last fight, I think he'll look to throw down a little more and give a better account of himself. So I guess I'm going to switch my pick here. So the official pick is going to be Kape, but I don't think I'm going to bet on this yet. I do want to see how Kape shows up. If he, goes back to throwing down like he usually does, and really how Nicolau looks. I mean, he was in the UFC for a bit. I believe he got cut and then is making his return. So maybe he's motivated to put on a show as well. So who knows? Gonna go with Kape, but gonna sit back and enjoy this from a betting perspective. Angela Hill versus Ashley Yoder, and Hill's gonna be the minus 360 favorite here, and the comeback on Yoder is plus 295. And I'll keep this one pretty short because it honestly is a pretty straightforward fight. And while I do think that the line does come off as a bit wide, it's just hard for me to see a very clear path to victory for Yoder. For her to win, she'll have to get pretty significant control time on Hill, and I just don't really see that happening here. Hill has pretty good takedown defense, and her striking is just levels above Ashley Yoder. Ashley Yoder is extremely hittable and is really just reliant on getting that takedown to get the win. Also, I feel that since their last fight, Hill has gotten a bit better, whereas Casey has more or less kind of just stagnated. Furthermore, Hill has also been fighting better fighters and have given a better account of herself, even in some of those losses, whereas with Yoder, she's losing to pretty low-level fighters. But yeah, minus 360 is a bit ridiculous, and even though I think it is a bit justified, I'm not willing to lay minus 360 on Hill, who has pretty consistently been, I don't want to say robbed because I don't think she was robbed in her last two decisions, but I think it's a mix between, I guess getting robbed and choking. She makes those fights a lot closer than they need to be, and she acts like it's a massive robbery. But I mean, the fights were close, but yeah, that's just I can't really say with much confidence that Hill will or won't show up. However, just based off of the tape, I think that Hill will have a pretty easy time just piecing up Yoder on the feet. So as far as the pick goes, I'm going to have to go with Hill. I think that she'll be able to stuff the takedowns of Yoder and be able to just touch her up on the feet. As far as the bet goes, though, I don't think I want to play the money line or really put Hill in parlays, since it is a little bit wide. But one prop I am looking at is Hill by knockout. I know more than likely she'll decision her way to a victory, but recently Hill has been sitting down on her punches a bit more, and she has stated that she's looking to take this out of the judge's hands. And I don't know how much stock I can place in that, but Yoder is definitely the type of opponent that if she was looking to get a knockout, this could be it. And if she starts putting it on Yoder like later in the fight, I think there's a good chance she could get her out of there. But at some of the odds now, I think it's worth a small stab. So the pick here is going to be Hill, and likely we'll be putting a little bit on Hill by KO and maybe a little bit on KO in the third round, since I think that if she does start pouring it on, it'll be later in the fight. But yeah, not going to put too much on it since, not super confident it'll happen. But I wouldn't be completely surprised if it did. Dan Ige versus Gavin Tucker, and this is a pretty exciting matchup in my opinion. So Dan Ige is going to be the minus 130 favorite here, and the comeback on Tucker is going to be plus 110. And let's start with Ige here. So he is coming off of a loss to Calvin Kattar, who, honestly, not too bad of a loss. Calvin Kattar's got really solid boxing, and I got to say, Ige's boxing has improved quite a bit. He did get touched up by Kattar a good amount that fight, but I don't think he gave a bad account of himself. And prior to that, he was on quite a bit of a win streak, even though a little controversial with some of his decisions. Regardless of how you felt those fights should have been scored, you got to admit, he did put up a pretty good fight in both of those matchups and honestly gave a pretty good account of himself. As far as what he does well, though, he's got good tight boxing. I mean, he's not super explosive or anything, but his punches do sting, and it does look like he sits down on them. He has good combination striking as well, good clinch striking, and overall just really good at mixing up his attack on the feet. He'll mix it up to the body and head, has a good uppercut, good hook, decent jab and 1-2, but overall on the feet, he's not bad. He's pretty fluid, very dynamic, just honestly, just decent, very good, very serviceable on the feet. He does seem to struggle a bit with the grappling, though. His takedown defense isn't particularly great. He is okay at working himself back up, but my issue with him is sometimes he does tend to take rounds off, and we'll spend extended periods of time on his back at certain points. I think it's because his cardio is a little bit questionable. He's not able to continuously defend takedowns and work himself back up, so he'll spend large chunks of time just on his back, maybe just regaining a bit of energy and just resting a little bit. I don't really like that about him because it's not like he wins emphatically on the feet to the point where he can, take a round off. So, especially in these 3-round fights, you can't really be doing that. His opponent, Gavin Tucker, is pretty well-rounded as well, and honestly, I think they match up pretty well because in a sense, they kind of mirror each other where, for Tucker, I'd say his grappling is a little better than his striking, whereas for Ige, I'd say his striking is a little bit better than his wrestling. However, I gotta say, though, I think that Tucker's striking has improved a good amount, too, and I'd say they're pretty even on the feet. Tucker's got a solid leg kick, a good counter hook, and 1-2, but again, I'd say his strength really is in his wrestling. He's got good timing on his takedowns and a really solid single leg that he goes to, and he's got some decent trips too. However, his issue is he's not particularly good at holding opponents down, so that's what makes this fight really tricky. Because on the feet, I'd say it'd play out pretty closely. I might give Ige the slight advantage, but not by much, and I'm honestly not too confident about either guy pulling ahead. in the striking department. I honestly see it playing out pretty close on the feet. However, I think that maybe Ige will be the one landing the harder shots, though. I think for Tucker to win, though, he will have to use his wrestling, and I definitely see him using that here to gain some control time. But again, like I've said before, his control time isn't really good. A lot of the times he's just holding guys up against the cage, or they're working their way up, and he'll have to chain takedowns on them. So that leads to a decent amount of control time, but that also means he's not able to be really busy in those positions. So stylistically, I see this being a pretty close matchup on the feet with Ige getting maybe a slight advantage, but I feel like that advantage is kind of mitigated a bit by Tucker being able to accumulate some control time with his wrestling. Outside of that, though, I do favor the level of competition that Ige is fought at. I mean, he's coming off of a loss to Cater, who, in my opinion, is a top five, top six guy in the division. He did get a win over Barboza, who, despite it being a bit controversial, he gave a decent account of himself there. And, Barboza, as we've seen, is still a top 15 guy. Bektic, who, has been a bit of a choker lately, but still a very skilled guy in there. And then Kevin Aguilar as well, another good win. But, taking a look at Tucker, he's fighting guys like Billy Quarantillo and Justin James, Sungwoo Choi, who, outside of Justin James isn't terrible, but these guys are, they're barely UFC caliber. They're kind of bottom of the barrel UFC guys. I don't think they're really even close to, being in the top 15, whereas guys that Ige has fought and are in the top 15. So basically, I'm watching these fights and, I see Dan Ige giving a good account of himself. He's looking good against, solid level competition, whereas Gavin Tucker, he's looked good against lower level competition. So if I had to make a pick here, I'm going to lean towards Ige. I think that all else being equal, I'm going to favor the guy who's fought the higher level of competition and is the younger guy. I mean, Ige, he's 29, so I think he's got a lot of room to grow and improve and just really build on his game. Whereas Tucker, he's looking pretty good, but at 34, I don't see him making too many improvements. So I think that between, their last fights, I think that Ige will be the one who's coming in, probably looking a little sharper. So with that said, I think I'm going to have to pick Ige here, but I don't think I'm going to bet this. I don't think there's a ton of value on this line, even at minus 130, because I do see a scenario where Tucker is able to secure enough control time to win some minutes and some rounds. So, very close fight, but I'm gonna take Ige to edge it out here. Ben Rothwell versus Philipe Lenz, and at the time of recording this, Rothwell is the minus 125 favorite, and the comeback on Lenz is plus 105, and recording this on the 2nd, which is quite a bit earlier than when I released this, but what I generally do is I'll look at lines on upcoming cards, and if I feel like they're a bit off, I'll dig into it a bit more, and for this one, I definitely do feel like the line is a bit off. I cap Big Ben at around like maybe 150 or 160, so I think there's a bit of value here. I'm not sure where the line is going to move when I do release this. I do intend on releasing this podcast on Sunday. I'm not sure where the line is going to move then, but I wouldn't recommend putting anything on Rothwell after minus 160, 170. However, I do put all my picks on my Bet MMA tips page as soon as I lock it in. So if for some reason you're seeing it at minus 125, it's because I locked it in early, and it has been posted as of the 2nd here. But let's just dive right into this matchup. So let's take a look at Ben Rothwell first, and Rothwell's just one of those guys that's just been hanging around a bit at the heavyweight division. Rothwell is a big guy, obviously, but he doesn't move as bad as you would think, though. He's a little bit flat-footed, but he really is able to make it work with his frame, his side-to-side movement. He's able to really just put it all together for someone his size. He likes to pressure and throw combinations in bursts. Occasionally, he will keep his lead hand out to kind of fight the hands a bit. However, I think he's most effective when he's in the clinch, just using his size to grind up on you and, just work those uppercuts, do a bit of damage, while at the same time just sapping the energy of his opponents. He's got decent grappling. His BJJ seems competent, but for the most part, his fights stay standing, and his takedown defense isn't too bad. As far as his offensive grappling goes, though, I think he primarily just goes to the clinch, likes to hold opponents up against the cage. It's not the most exciting fight style, but it's pretty damn effective and honestly gets the job done against a lot of these less athletic or even out of shape heavyweights. We saw him use it pretty effectively against OSP, where OSP, he was moving up a weight class and, he just didn't really come in great shape at that fight. Like, he was sucking wind hard about halfway through that second round. Ben's stand-up wasn't bad that fight, but I think what really won him the fight was just the control time he accrued when he had OSP up against the fence for extended periods of time. However, the only thing that's got me a little cautious about this fight is his fight against Arlovski and his second fight against Arlovski in his second return fight, where Arlovski basically just touched him up. I mean, that was a pretty crazy performance by Arlovski, probably his best performance to date. And even then, a 40-year-old Arlovski was able to just dance circles around Rothwell and just piece him up for 3 rounds. That wasn't a particularly good look. I don't know what came over Arlovski that fight, but maybe it was the fact that it was a rematch and Arlovski didn't want to have to potentially go do a trilogy with Rothwell, or that he may have already game planned pretty well for him, had something in place already and just was very comfortable that fight. But in any case, I don't want to put too much weight on that fight, but it's definitely in the back of my mind here, especially in this matchup where he's going up against Linz, who is going to be a decent bit faster, even though he is a little smaller. But let's take a look at Linz. So for those of you who don't know, he was the PFL 2018 season tournament winner, and he did win $1 million that tournament. So the thing is, you really have to wonder where his head's at right now. I would assume that unless he's been extremely careless with his money, that he's financially well off, or at least a lot more well off than a lot of other fighters. So I don't think he's necessarily doing it to cash a paycheck. So is he doing it for the recognition of fighting in the UFC to really prove himself? I don't know, but the fact that he hasn't really shown any urgency in his last 2 fights really makes me question what he's doing in the UFC anyways. However, that being said though, his last 2 matchups weren't really favorable for him. And before I get too deep into that, I do want to mention that Linz is primarily a counterpuncher. He will throw, some jabs and kicks to stay busy, but he's generally not going to be the one that's leading. Usually he'll wait for an opponent to throw so that he can find an opening to capitalize on. And generally he's not very aggressive or will move forward unless he's got his opponent hurt. So with that in mind, he gets matched up with Arlovski in his UFC debut, who is a bit of a counterpuncher too. So essentially you get a bit of a staring contest where both guys don't really want to overcommit and leave themselves open to getting hurt. So it just ended up being a pretty low volume, low pace fight, and Arlovski was able to eke out with the decision there. Then in his next fight, he gets matched up with Tanner Boser, who is a bit smaller for a heavyweight as well, and honestly kind of matches the size and the speed of Philipe Linz very well. And Linz wasn't able to really capitalize on the speed advantage that he usually has against the slower heavyweights, and Boser was able to catch him. And honestly, that wasn't a particularly good look, since Boser isn't historically a knockout guy, and him getting put out by Boser, not a good look. And I've always suspected the chin of Linz a bit, so going into this matchup, that is a bit of a concern for him. But yeah, taking a look at this matchup, I definitely do favor Rothwell a bit more. Rothwell will be the bigger guy in this matchup, and I think he will be the one pressuring as well. I definitely seeing the size and the strength of Rothwell being an issue for Linz. The only way I see Linz winning this is if he's able to consistently catch Ben coming in. While I do see Linz having a bit of success doing this, I don't think he'll be able to do it consistently over 3 rounds. I also don't think that Ben will continuously stand and trade with Linz, especially if Linz is going to be catching him. I do think that Ben will look to close the distance, pressure him a bit, and then close the distance to really just clinch up with Linz and really just work him up against the cage, use his size advantage, use his strength advantage to really just grind Linz out for 3 rounds. Linz will be the faster fighter in this matchup, and I definitely do see a scenario where Linz is able to avoid a lot of the big shots of Ben and is able to counter him and land cleaner shots of his own. So for that reason, I wouldn't lay more than minus 160 or so on Big Ben. That said, though, Linz has just looked like an absolute husk of himself since joining the UFC. I mean, supposedly he was coming off of an injury after that PFL tournament, but yeah, he just hasn't really been the same after that PFL win. But who knows? He might have a bit of a resurgence. But right now at minus 125, I think is a really good spot for Ben. So the pick here, I'm going to have to go with Ben. And again, I have a 1.25 unit bet placed on Big Ben right now. Misha Cirkunov versus Ryan Spann. And at the time of recording this, Cirkunov is the minus 138 favorite. And the comeback on Spann is plus 118. And let's start with Cirkunov, who's an absolute tank of a man. His striking isn't particularly great. I mean, he's got some heavy leg kicks and does like to blitz in with combos, but really his bread and butter is his offensive grappling. He's got good timing on his level changes and good transitions and really slick BJJ. And if he's able to get you to the ground, you're in a lot of trouble. And some people will say that him falling in love with his hands recently has really kind of screwed him up and put him on a bit of a skid. And while I don't disagree with that, I think there are some other factors too. In his fight with Johnny Walker, he did eat a pretty clean knee, and that was very unfortunate for him, but I don't think it was an issue of just him wanting to keep it standing. He might have just wanted to shoot, or maybe was looking for the single leg. I don't think his game plan going into this was to stand and bang with Johnny Walker. And then in his fight with Volkan Oezdemir, he was kind of blitzing forward and then got caught with a punch to the side of the head. Some would say maybe even like near the back of the head. Really close though, but he put himself in a really bad position just blitzing forward and then kind of running into the fence there. So definitely a bit of a blunder on his end. So I don't think his striking is necessarily terrible. I think he's just been a bit unlucky in his last few losses. However, in his loss against Teixeira, he was taken down by Glover and did get his back taken and eventually got ground and pounded out to a TKO victory in the first round. And that is my issue with Cirkunov. While he's good offensively with the grappling and not too bad with the striking, it's just that his defense, whether it's the striking or the grappling, is pretty bad. Like, just how easily he had his back taken, and the fact that he wasn't really fighting the hands, even though Teixeira looked like he had the rear naked choke locked in pretty tight. It was a pretty bad look. So Cirkunov is mainly just all offense and no defense, and that's pretty concerning considering he's been finished 3 times out of his last 5 fights, and now he's getting matched up with Spann, who can definitely crack. So while Cirkunov is really good when he's the one pressuring and doing damage and attacking, when the tables get turned on him, he just crumbles. And again, he will be going against Ryan Spann, who definitely has some power in his hands. On the feet, he literally likes to walk opponents down and just tee off on them. Spann will have a decent reach advantage in this fight, which will play to his favor. He's got a nice jab and a good uppercut. He's also got a good 1-2, but will start to get aggressive when opponents are backed up against the cage. However, what I don't like about Spann, though, is his takedown defense isn't great. We did see in the Devin Clark fight that, even though he did get taken down a few times, he was able to get back up pretty quickly. But again, his takedown defense overall isn't great. He doesn't really dig any underhooks or sprawl at all. And while he was able to get back to his feet pretty quickly against Clark, I think that Cirkunov will have much better top control if he is able to get Spann to the floor here. Honestly, this fight is pretty tough to call. I think that if Cirkunov is able to get the takedown early and secure some top control time, I definitely think that he is live for a submission. However, I have seen Cirkunov get swept and reversed before, and Spann does have a sneaky guillotine even though Cirkunov doesn't have much of a neck. That is something you still have to look out for. And I don't really know if I can trust Cirkunov to shoot the takedown here. If he does, I do favor him quite a bit, but all fights do start standing, and I don't think that Cirkunov is going to shoot for the takedown immediately. He's going to have to set up his takedowns, and I definitely see there being a few exchanges on the feet before he is able to land a clean takedown on Spann. And in those moments, I definitely think that Cirkunov is liable to getting caught there because the way he fights, he tends to overextend a bit on his combinations and finds himself in very awkward positions. So if Cirkunov comes in a little wild with his striking, I think that Spann can definitely catch him. And even if Cirkunov is able to get the fight to the ground, I'm not 100% convinced that he will be able to get Spann out of there early. And we haven't really seen Cirkunov get out of that first round in over 4 years, so we don't really know how his cardio is going to hold up. He is getting a bit older, and he's coming off of a decent layoff, and dude's absolutely jacked. So we don't know, if he isn't able to get Spann out of there in that first round, how he's going to look in that second or third round. Tough fight to call, but I think I'm going to have to go with Cirkunov here. I think that with how bad Spann's takedown defense is, I think that Cirkunov will be able to take the fight to the ground in that first round. I think that Cirkunov, he'll be aggressive on the ground and he'll likely work that submission. I think he will be able to get it, but not super confident here. Honestly, I see this fight playing out a number of different ways, but I'm just going to go with the more obvious one. And in terms of a bet, though, I'm not going to bet this. It's pretty crazy high variance fight, but the pick is Cirkunov, but no bet. Here we go, main event time. Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards, and Leon Edwards is going to be the minus 255 favorite here, and the comeback on Muhammad is plus 215. And honestly, I'm pretty excited for this fight. Obviously, I'd love to have seen Khamzat versus Edwards here, but not a bad fight or bad replacement in my opinion. Muhammad is a pretty well-rounded fighter, really exciting to watch, and I definitely do think that he's due for another shot at the top 10 here. That said, though, I do think he is a bit outmatched. However, I believe that Muhammad definitely has all of the tools to make this a very close fight. Muhammad's one of those guys who's just really well-rounded everywhere. Honestly, I think he's probably the best fighter that's non-elite, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. I just think that he's not elite in really any department, but he just does everything so well. He could handle most of the guys outside of the top 10, but when it comes to guys who are really good at a certain part of their game, they could take the game, or they could take the fight to where they're good at. And whereas for Muhammad, a lot of the times he's just taking the fight to where their opponent is weakest at. So, like I've said before about, fighters that are kind of similar to Muhammad, where they're really well-rounded and they're good everywhere, they don't have a lot of weaknesses, that can get them really far in the UFC, but it's going to be real tough for them to crack that top 5, top 10 when they don't have an elite skill that they can consistently go to. That said, though, Muhammad has shown a lot of improvements in his striking, in his wrestling, and, he could slowly be inching towards that next step up, but he hasn't really shown it just yet. As far as what he does well, though, he has great footwork, great head movement, really good feints, really good at switching stances, good combination punching, and has good pressure and good cardio. I actually really like Muhammad a lot on the feet when it comes to his offensive striking. He's got very good movement, and overall, just his rhythm and flow is just a lot of fun to watch. Defensively, though, he does leave a bit to be desired. I mean, he has good head movement, but a lot of the time when he's engaging in the pocket, he does tend to get hit a bit, especially after he throws his combinations or when he's exiting the pocket. So that makes him a bit hittable, and it makes exchanges play out a bit closer than they should. And so a lot of the times, he'll throw 2 or 3 punches, he'll land a couple of them, but end up eating a shot or two after the exchange, in which case, it kind of evens up the exchanges or the shots absorbed and taken in that exchange. And in the judge's eyes, it doesn't look that good because at the end of the day, the other fighter is the one who ends up landing the final shot. So optics wise, that's generally, not too good, but Muhammad is able to overcome that because he has pretty good cardio and is able to consistently pressure his opponents. So if his opponents, are a step behind and they aren't able to land clean on him after these exchanges, he does usually come out ahead. He's also got really solid wrestling. Like I've said before, he's really well-rounded, doesn't really have any sort of weaknesses, and will go to the wrestling if, he feels that, he could get some control time there, win some minutes, or if he feels that his opponent isn't particularly strong there, he'll look to take him down and maybe even try and work the sub, even though he's only has one win by submission in the UFC. As far as his opponent goes, Edwards, I think we all know what he does well. He has decent striking, a little, simple, but very effective. He has a good jab, good 1-2. A bit low volume on the feet though. He has gone to his takedowns a little bit more. Decent top control, good body lock takedown. Again, not super busy when it comes to the output, even when he does have some control time. However, like I said before, his strength really is in the clinch game. He's great at tying opponents up after they exit the pocket. He's got great clinch knees and elbows and uppercuts in the clinch, and he's constantly looking for openings to engage in the clinch too, whether it's up against the fence or if it's just after an exchange. Edwards just is an absolute beast there, and his elbows after breaking from the clinch are super deadly. I'm honestly a bit surprised he doesn't have more doctor stoppages in his record, considering how often he busts up his opponent's face with those elbows. It's not the most visually or crowd-pleasing sort of style, but it's very effective, and it's worked for him so far. Taking a look at this matchup, though, I do definitely favor Edwards here. He's, I'd say, the more proven fighter. He's fought in pretty high-level guys, and he wins pretty dominantly, in my opinion. It's not very exciting, but I don't ever really see him in any sort of trouble. With that being said, though, Edwards also doesn't really run away with rounds. I think against a fighter like Muhammad, where he will be pressured a bit, and Muhammad will be throwing some volume, that it could swing. A few rounds could definitely swing in Muhammad's favor, where if Edwards isn't doing too much in the clinch or isn't doing enough damage in the clinch, I could see the judges giving certain rounds to Muhammad just for being the more active and more pressuring fighter. So for that reason, I do intend on putting about half a unit on Muhammad by decision. Again, the props haven't come out yet, but I definitely do plan on putting a little bit on that. I think that Muhammad could definitely keep it close on the feet, maybe even be able to pull out ahead if he's the one pressuring, and if Edwards is the one backing down, he's able to land a few more or get ahead a bit on the striking. Obviously, there is the concern of Edwards being able to control Muhammad a bit in the clinch and do the damage there. However, outside of that, I do see some other areas that Muhammad can potentially win in. Again, on the feet, I do see Muhammad potentially outlanding Edwards, and also I think that Muhammad's really going to have to go utilize his leg kicks, low leg kicks. He's not a massive leg kicker, but we have seen Edwards get hurt by it a bit, so if Muhammad is able to commit to the leg attack game, I think he could rack up some points on the scorecards. Muhammad will also have his wrestling to go to. I mean, he's not an elite wrestler, but he does have a good single leg, and he could definitely look to press Edwards up into the fence for a little bit. Work the head positioning and maybe land a few trips. I don't see him having too much success with the wrestling, but it's definitely a tool he can use to accumulate a tiny bit of control time and really just neutralize some of the clinch control time that Edwards is looking to use. But Edwards is a big dude. I'd say he's one of the bigger welterweights, and it's going to be tough for Muhammad to outwork him in the clinch or really in a lot of grappling situations. So he's going to have to keep mixing it up. However, I am going to have to favor Edwards here. He's had a far more impressive resume, and he's just a really good fighter. But I feel the line is a bit wide here because I think that the fight will play out relatively close. I do think that Muhammad should be able to win a round off of Leon, and possibly 2 rounds. I think he has a good chance of winning 2 rounds off of Leon, but I think it'll come down to one of the championship rounds for Muhammad if he is going to steal a decision here. We'll see how much he's really improved, how his cardio is going to hold up in those championship rounds. But I'm pretty excited for this fight. But to wrap it up, I am going to have to pick Edwards here, but I'm going to put a half a unit bet on Muhammad by decision when the line comes out for that. And that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Let's keep this train rolling. Gotta dig myself out of this hole that I put myself in to begin the year with. And just a few more winning events, and we'll likely be in the green for this year. So hopefully we can get another W this week. And just look to bounce back, continue to bounce back. And I know I mentioned, taking picks or avoiding certain picks in this podcast, but if it's not on my Bet MMA tips page, it's not an official pick. So yeah, because a lot of the time I'll go back and forth on certain fights, and I may end up pulling the trigger on certain fights, and maybe back away from certain fights if I get a bit more information. So at the end of the day, whatever is on my Bet MMA tips page is what I've decided to go with. Anyways, that'll do it for this podcast. Appreciate you guys for listening, and I'll catch you guys next time.